So now we're going to go ahead and update our home view, which we've been calling our featured playlist view, which we see inside of our views right here. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to update the template name to be just slightly different. And this time it's going to be playlists and featured list.html. And so let's go ahead and create this one. And it's going to be based off of what we've already done. So featured list.html. So playlist list, let's copy this, bring it in here, save it, and there we go. So if we come back in featured, should be fine. Nothing should have changed. This time I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that title. I don't really need that at this point. So we save it and refresh just to double check. Sure enough, there it is. Okay, so how is it that I'm going to go about solving this? Well, there's a couple of different ways on how we can consider solving what this should look like. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and just add a new folder called cards. And inside of there, I'm going to give it a movie.html and then a show.html. Okay. So I might actually end up using these as the same one. But the general idea is now, while I'm looping through each iteration, this will give me the actual featured playlist title. So let's give this a div instead of a list element. Okay. This time it does not actually need a slug. I don't need a detail view for this particular title. I probably don't even need the short display. But instead what I would like is I would like to iterate through each individual item in here. So I'll go ahead and give an H3 for this title. And yes, by all means, add in the description if you are so inclined, you know, like that. And then we'll go ahead and iterate through for each video or each playlist in instance dot, well, do you remember what it was? Maybe you do, maybe not. Either way, doesn't matter. We can see that we have this related many-to-many field, which is fine. We could totally use related as the one we want to use. Or we can actually use the related objects in the sense of the playlist related set. So what I'm going to do then is actually get related items. I'm going to create a instance method on the playlist itself, and I'm going to define it as get related items, and it's going to take in self and return self dot playlist and related set dot all. Now again, we could actually filter these down further. I don't actually think it's necessary for many different reasons we'll get into in a second, but we'll go ahead and get related items. Now I'll go ahead and just call instance.getRelatedItems. And now we've got our int4 here. And again, I'll go ahead and put a list element, li being playlist. Okay, so we save that. And we refresh on our home page, and there we go. So we got our playlist related objects in here. Okay, so again, we have to actually grab what it is that we're trying to use, which in this case is just simply related, right? So that's the related playlist now. So this is actually not the correct way to think about this, but rather we'll call it item in related items, and now item.related, and there we go. Cool. So why did I actually make these cards here? Well, it's actually for these related items. But I'm going to go ahead and make another featured playlist just in case. And this time I'm going to call it TV shows. And I'll give it a published item here. And I'll go ahead and select the two items that I know were TV shows. Let's go ahead and save that. And go back in here. And there we go. So now we've got our feature playlist. We have two different ways of looking at this stuff. And so what I want to do then is actually have a condition of what's going to be rendered, which HTML card is going to be rendered based off of the type of playlist that we have. So I can go ahead and say if item.related.type, well, really I want to say if it is movie, then I'll go ahead and render out the movie one. And then I'll go ahead and say elif. If it's show, then I'll go ahead and render out the show. So is show. And then I'll just go ahead and say else as an empty block here. Okay, so how do I actually see on whether or not it is a movie or a show, right? So the reason I'm doing it this way versus doing .type and then equals equals to something, I actually don't want to have too much logic in here. So I can definitely add these instance methods now back into our actual model itself, into the playlist item, and now just define is movie, and this one will just return self.type equals to the self.playlist choices dot movie, right? And I'm going to just give it a property method in this case. Okay, and then next one being is show. I could do this for each type, but I think this is actually the easiest one to do. Okay, so now we've got movie and is show. So then this time I'll go ahead and say include the playlists slash cards slash movie with movie equaling to the item dot related, the actual playlist that I would be using here. So copy that same thing with the show one. Oh, and I actually needed HTML next to movie. Okay, so now in here I've got movie and show. It should actually be show equals to item dot related. And in here I've got show. Okay, so H1, this is a show, and this is a movie. Okay, so let's save it, refresh in here, and there we go. Cool. So this is now giving me some nice ways of just really quickly changing the way anything looks, whether it's a show or a movie. So show, we had, I think we had seasons.count in there. That actually is not correct. So let's go ahead and take a look at our model. And of course it's not correct because we're going based off of the playlist itself, not the proxy. So it's not actually going to be using the proxy instance methods in there. So stuff like this, right? So get short display and all that. So this comes back to like, okay, should we even have instance methods on the proxies themselves, or should we actually move this back into being in the main playlist object? That's not something I'm going to cover at this point. I don't think it's fully necessary to do because the other thing is with this TV show, I can still call all of this stuff inside of the template itself. So playlist set published count comes back, and now I can go ahead and say 2 seasons if I needed to even show that on here. I don't think you will actually, because in the case of something like Netflix, realistically what you're going to show is a div and then some sort of image, which we have never done in this case. You would have an image and then the show name, and then that would just iterate through in there. So that's really what you would end up doing with one of these cards. But I just wanted the ability to have these cards so then I can actually start linking through to these things. So that's something I definitely still need to do to actually have the homepage work properly. So how do we actually create the necessary links for this? Well, that comes back into our main proxy model, so our playlist in here. So this is going to be coming back to what we had with this, but now it's going to be a defined get absolute URL. This is very standard for Django itself. I'm not going to be using the convenience methods, but instead I'm just going to return based off of the URLs that I know. First of all, I'll go ahead and say if self.isMovie, then I'm going to return slash movies and the slug itself, so self.slug. Okay, and I'm going to have a trailing slash in this case. Okay, and if it's a show, same thing, and I think we called it shows. And then if it's a season, so in this case, if it is a parent, we'll go ahead and say if self.parent is not none. In that case, I pretty much know it's a TV show, but I probably should still test what the actual property is. So let's go ahead and add the property method again, and season, not to get things too complicated for us. So if season, so this time it's going to be or if season and self.parent is not none. Then we'll go ahead and use self.parent.slug and then seasons and self.slug with a trailing slash. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and return the playlists and self.slug. Okay, so this get absolute URL method now will allow us to actually link our various items. So inside of the show itself, we can do a href, and this is going to be show.get absolute URL of that show. I'm going to go ahead and copy the same thing for the movie and just change the variable. There we go. And refresh in here. Now I actually have links to these things, as we see. Great. So next I can link everything else, essentially. So the show detail, I don't need. Playlist detail, I don't need a link. Season detail, I do need a link because I have other playlists in here. Or maybe I wouldn't need a link because I didn't actually make a video view at all. I just made the seasons themselves. So we'll skip that one. But the TV show, the season itself, I do want to link to. So again, a href. And in this case, it's going to be season.get absolute URL. And we can leave season.order. I no longer need the slug or the ID showing up. So we refresh, and now I can see season 1, season 2, and so on. I probably don't need the order in the seasons anymore either, because of how we want this displayed to our user. If you accidentally put the wrong order, perhaps you don't want those numbers to look out. Instead, maybe you'd use something more like a for loop .counter in here to actually give a different display order itself that's based off of the for loop versus what's actually stored in the database. But there we go. We now have season 1, season 2, and so on. Cool. So that's our homepage. It's now all linked up. Now all we need to do is our categories and our tags and actually see how we can use a lot of these same elements inside of those things.